My name is Paul Belliveau. I'm the math department chair here at McLean School. Can't believe I had to look down and read that. I should know that part. I've really only had 3 full-time jobs in my life. Educator, mainly in math classrooms, gymnastics coach, which was my main job out of college, did a part-time in college, full-time afterwards, and janitor, which I was terrible at. But 2 of those jobs have caused me to spend a great deal of time around essentially frightened children. That wasn't the plan. I didn't plan on that. And I originally thought of this presentation as a sort of everything I learned about keeping kids motivated in the classroom, I learned while coaching gymnastics. It's a little bit of a stretch, kind of like that everything I need to know in life I learned in kindergarten book, which is really patently untrue, but kind of feels true. It's the same sort of idea. And I learned a lot in gyms. So to tell you about that, I first want to tell you just a tiny bit about how I came to spend so much time around upside down frightened children. And this is how I started with it. I don't know if I have a music on that. Okay. This is the person in the middle there is me. It's a chair balancing act for University of Maryland Gymkhana. Up until I was about 40 years old, when I showed people this picture, they said, "You're insane." Since then, I show people this picture and they say, "You had hair." Those chairs fell sometimes. They're not welded together in any way. They fell over. We fell. We were expected to get up, do it again. We were definitely resilient, possibly to the point of impulsive and self-destructive, but we were resilient. We kept doing it. And this led to me coaching in a lot of different environments. Sometimes in gymnastics, the idea of supporting the child is somewhat literal. I've coached high school, I've coached a lot of different ways, cheerleading clinics, and again, there's an idea of a sort of literal support there. I like this clip mainly for that reason. That look on this young athlete's face is pretty much her personality. Incredibly anxious, but she really wanted to make her high school cheerleading team. She did. As Ms. Leahy said, I was one of the links in that chain there, but she wanted to quit a lot. She didn't. She was successful at it, but it required a certain type of support and a certain type of atmosphere in order for her to be successful there. And one thing you're mainly dealing with when kids want to quit, one of the components is fear. And I love that photo. It looks scary. It looks really scary to most people. If you look at it closely, though, no one in that picture is scared. Gymnast doesn't look scared. Her teammates don't look scared. I wasn't scared. I was annoyed. She was on my team. Her legs are apart. Her toes aren't pointed. There's no fear in that photo anywhere, actually. Fear is contextual. It's individual, it's personal, and it changes. We can change it for the better. It can be lessened. Should probably do this too. Whoop. This was a great bit. There we go. Okay. Anxiety, which is a little different. I'll talk about that in a second. Students with anxiety believe they don't have control or are losing control. It's the main thing about anxiety. And anxiety is a little bit different from fear, and they have to be treated differently. Our keynote speaker, Ms. Leahy, said something similar to this about things that work in the short term and things that work in the long term. Fear is usually a short-term condition, and it's good to be able to deal with it. But that's not resilience, as she said. Resilience is a little bit different. This is a great bit of advice I received early in my career, but it was a little misleading. Until you eliminate the fear, you have no idea what the problem really is. Again, as our keynote speaker said, this is a great bit of short-term advice. I went to Duke Nelligan, who's the University of Maryland women's gymnastics team coach. There is a D1 program back in the 80s, probably still is today. And I had a gymnast who was struggling with something who I was coaching. I wanted to talk training, technique, biomechanics, physiology, everything. And Duke just basically said, forget all that. Find out what she's afraid of. You know enough to fix it if you can get her through that. And that was the first time I'd really heard it stated that bluntly and simply. And in the short term, that's great. And that does help. Am I missing a slide? Hang on one sec. But But anxiety is something a little bit different. It's a little bit more long-term with that. So with fear versus anxiety, let me go back to this scary picture again. I do love this one. This child has no fear in it, none whatsoever. But she is taking a risk. And one thing we need to do is encourage kids to take risks. I'll talk about that more in detail. So she's taking this risk, but there's no fear. Like the slide just said, students with anxiety believe they don't have control. She's in control, so there's no fear. But there's a risk there. That's dangerous. That's a physically dangerous thing she's doing, but she's in control, so she's okay. She was anxious, though. The kid was overflowing with anxiety. She was 10 pounds of anxious in a 5-pound bag, frankly. I coached her for a local high school. I spent a great deal of time talking to her about how she could get a decent score when the school equipment, we'd go to a different school and the equipment would be terrible. She'd get very anxious about that. No reason to be. She thought she had a rival, actually. She was on a club team with a friend of hers, and that girl was competing for another school. Both straight A students, both had high GPAs, both taking multivariable calculus as seniors. But this other kid was just slightly higher than her. These were the anxieties that she dealt with. And psychologists, to oversimplify, separate fear and anxiety by fear if you are in some sort of short-term danger, what you're feeling is fear, and if you're not, what you're feeling is anxiety. It's a gross oversimplification, but anxiety is a thing you really need to deal with for the child who wants to quit. If there's an actual physical threat in the room and the child wants to run, that's healthy. That's fine. You don't really want to discourage that necessarily. Anxiety is different. Why do they want to quit when there isn't that physical danger? And for me, that's all about building an environment. And that's one thing I wanted to put out in the front. I don't have a lot of quick short-term fixes. Resiliency is, in my experience, a side effect. It's a little bit like how some health experts describe weight loss. The weight loss almost shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to eat healthier and to move more. It should be a side effect. Not a lot of short-term ideas in here today because I haven't seen those work. I've seen those work for fear, but anxiety is a little bit different. So you have to build an environment where the anxiety is lessened and where the success is more often. So it's got to be predictable and a successful experience for the child over and over again. If that happens, give them a taste of that success, you can start to build that resilience. And the first thing I need to know before to do that is answer this question, which every educator feels semi-regularly. Parents may feel it too, but I hope parents know the answer to that more so. Why are these children in front of me? Knowing the answer to this question is a job description in a gymnastics club. Because when you work full-time at a gymnastics club, the competitive team cannot financially support the club. And there's a lot of other things going on, and they're not there for 40 hours a week. So if you're what's called a gym bum, which I was, you're there 6 or 7 days a week, you sleep on the trampoline when you're there too late and have an early class the next morning, you're doing all sorts of things. Some of the things you're doing are birthday parties, summer camps, recreational classes, clinics, pre-team, competitive team. And it's just part of the job description to know why the child is in front of you, because you handle each one very, very differently. We don't officially run academic programs like this usually, except in my experience, it's pretty close. If I have a remediated group of students in front of me, I'm trying to make sure they learn skills, I'm trying to make sure they have confidence. Often they have specific goals, improved SAT scores or something, so I'm going to run it the way I would run a recreational class or a clinic perhaps. My grade level classes, I'd like them to enjoy math more. They need to learn specific skills, they need to feel more confident. I'll run that sort of like a summer camp, minus popsicles and pool trips and pony rides and things like that. But there's no arts and crafts or nap, but I do bring that sort of mentality to it. Honors classes, that's a kid on a pre-team, hopefully headed to a competitive team. In a recreational class, I'm not going to take kids that far out of their comfort zone. I'm going to try and expand their comfort zone. By the time I get to a competitive team or an AP class, I'm going to redefine the notion of comfort zone. If I have a student there, they don't get to pick their comfort zone. The college board does, or the judges do at the meet. One element of this is the selection process has to be good. You have to place kids on a track where they'll be successful. And I don't mean tracking in the educational term. We're very flexible about that here in McLean. Yes, we have grade level and honors classes. We do let kids switch very often back and forth. But you have to put them in the way that they'll be successful. If you're in a program where the selection process is bad, or a household where you're pushing a kid into the wrong level of difficulty for them, you're kind of doomed from the start. So sometimes you have to ask yourself the fundamental question, why is this child in front of me? And should this child be in front of me in this room right now? For any learning environment, okay, let's say you know why the kid is in front of them. Figure that part out. And it's the right placement. They should be in front of you for this purpose, whatever that is, whatever classroom you're in, whatever program you're running. There are 4 things that I always try to bring that I think are vital. Nothing too radical here, I think. Structure, expectations, positive reinforcement in the sense of saying good things about the child, looking for ways to encourage when they do the right thing. This last one could seem weird, and I choose this phrasing very, very carefully. They need a feeling of genuine accomplishment. That's 2 components they absolutely need. First, they need to accomplish something, then they need to feel like they've accomplished something. I've worked with students who were actually accomplishing great things and didn't know it. There was some element in their lives that kept them from knowing they were doing something well. I've worked for students who struggled to accomplish things as well, but they need that. They absolutely need that feeling of genuine accomplishment in the end. That's probably the most important thing. One of my early mentors in a gymnastics club told me about an incredibly popular coach who worked at a team level. Kids loved this person, had a great time with them, she made them feel great. She just wasn't, at the end of the day, a very good coach. They didn't accomplish much. They didn't learn a whole lot. Most of them quit the gym, saying great things about this coach on the way out the door. Hey, it was great, we had fun. Now I'm going somewhere where I'll actually learn something. I'll probably be yelled at and have less fun, but I'll learn something. And the coach had to be let go because she no longer had any kids to coach. They have to accomplish something, and they have to know what they've accomplished. Talk about these, break these down a little bit, structure. You need to have an underlying structure. Again, this isn't super new to most of you probably, but I want to say a few words about what kind of, how that can play out. You need to know what you're building towards. Hopefully there's a reason why these kids are in front of you, and you know what that reason is, and you're working towards it. Do your learners know what you're building towards? And this is not, some of you may think I'm setting you up sort of an obvious question, oh, I have to tell them what they're burning towards. Maybe, maybe not. It depends. It all goes back to that question, why are these children in front of me? Are you teaching them, coaching them, or training them? Sometimes if you're training them for something specific, they don't need to know that. Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. That is a real martial arts training technique, and sometimes it works better if the kid has no idea why they're waxing a car, and they don't know they're also learning how to block a punch. Sometimes the kid needs to know what's coming next, and needs to know the structure. The point is, though, you need to know the structure. You need to know it very, very well. You need to know what you're building towards and how you're getting there, and you can decide how much to tell the kids about it. This may sound contradictory to what I just said. I'm going to give some ideas that could sound like I'm contradicting myself. Hopefully I'm not. Preview what's coming incessantly. Okay? Preview what's coming incessantly, but preview what they need to know. Okay? Do they need to know every element of your structure before they get to it? No, they don't. Do they need to know why they're waxing the car, painting the fence, to use the Karate Kid analogy again? Maybe not, but they need to know that today they're waxing the car and tomorrow they're painting the fence. They don't necessarily need to know why they're doing a particular project in the greater long-term sense, but they need to know when that project is, how long it'll take, how much time to allocate, how scary it'll be. So you got to preview what's coming up to them, just the things that they'll care about, that they know. You don't have to tell them every trick you're doing, but they got to have some sense of what's coming up. It's got to be predictable for them. And I already said this one, you must know the underlying principles even if your students do it. Students don't at first, or ever, for that matter. Early in my career, I actually got to work in a gym for several years with an Olympic level gymnast, Dominique Dawes, from the Hills Angels program. Her coach was Kelly Hill, who mentored me a lot in coaching kids at first. One This could sound insulting, please don't hear it that way at all. It could, but I sometimes thought the relationship between the coach and the high gymnast at that level is almost a little bit like the jockey and the horse, in a way. Not comparing a child to an animal in any way, it's not, but Dominique didn't need to know everything she was doing. Very smart young woman, but she didn't need to understand everything that was going on. Her coaches did, and in the moment, you don't want her thinking about everything that's going on. I've sometimes with some precocious math-oriented gymnasts of mine, I've used vectors and physics to help them explain what they're doing, but I don't want them thinking about that in midair. Okay, I have to know what they're doing in midair and why it works that way. When their 2 feet are on the ground, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I've worked with other gymnasts who had no clue what they were doing. I literally taught the same high-level bar trick to 2 kids in the same night. One of them, who is now a math teacher, actually, I explained vectors and forces and everything that was necessary for it. For the other one, I told her where to start. I stood across the room, and at the point where I needed her to just twitch her body and get over the bar, I just screamed, "Jenny, get over here!" And she just twitched and flopped in the right way. So those are 2 different kids, one of whom needed to know the structure to proceed, another one just needed me to yell at her at the right moment. 2 different things. Here's an underlying structure example from gymnastics. There are, and for your program, your course, your household, whatever you're thinking of, you have to figure this part out for yourself. Sorry, I don't know that. There's 2 things in gymnastics coaches always emphasize. 2 body positions, they're related. I'll demonstrate really quick. One of them is an open body position. You're standing up straight. This is why we don't compete in these jackets. You arch your body, that's an open body position, that's it. This is a hollow body position. Fairly simple, right? We emphasize this over and over and over again, and here's why. Here's a vault. Hollow, then open. That's a vault. If she starts twisting, that system will still be there. Here's the same young lady on uneven bars. These are called giant swings. She opens her body, then she does a hollow body, and she keeps alternating these 2 motions over and over and over again to make it around the bar. That's literally almost all she's doing, is alternating between hollow and open body positions. It's part of what makes it look easy. It's not. But if she hasn't internalized those bits of the structure of this sport, if she doesn't have that down, oh, she releases, she was open, and she's hollow, then she lands. That's all she's doing, is alternating those 2 body positions. At the right time, in the right way. Oh, here she messes it up a little. She's open, she hollows too soon, tuck comes up a little short. All I have to say by way of correction is, you didn't stay open long enough. That's all I have to say if I've built a program, or if she comes from a program where those principles are internalized, where they're hammered and hammered. Somebody had to know those principles so that I can just say that quickly. What are those principles for you? I don't know. Depends on why you're here. If you're a teacher, in Algebra 1, I try and tie everything back to order of operations. In pre-calculus, I try and tie everything back to the idea of vectors. Almost everything you do in pre-calculus, unit circle, parametric equations, they can all be explained in terms of vectors. You can tie it all together. There's usually an underlying principle to something that you're doing. Find it, internalize it, tie everything back to it. 80% of gymnastics is just those 2 body positions. I left off balance beam because balance beam is the exception, and that's actually why I hated coaching it. And the fact that I'm a guy, and guys don't like standing on balance beams. But yeah, find that underlying principle, make that part of your structure. Does Samantha need to think about that every time? No, she doesn't even need to know it anymore. That's gotten reflexive for her. But find that underlying structure and make it work. Second part, expectations. What do you expect of the learner in your program, the child in your home, the student in your classroom? You have to set these expectations. Seems kind of obvious, I hope. Establish your rules. Fairly straightforward. You got to have some rules to establish, whatever they are. Over-communicate them. I've seen this both with frustrated teachers, sometimes new teachers. They often have these behavioral norms. They just think kids should already come to them knowing. I had one teacher who just got really upset because kids wouldn't automatically take off their hats when they came into the building. She thought everyone knew that. I asked her if she'd ever been to a synagogue. Not everyone knows that. There are differences, actually. But you have to over-communicate them. And not only that, but kids, even if they did hear a rule before, every time a kid grows a certain amount, it's a different person. They have to hear it again. If a student is frightened, they're a different person in that moment. They have to hear it again. Not yelling, reminding. They just have to gently be reminded of the rules. If they've transgressed a rule, sometimes they just need, all you need to say is remind them of the rule. You need to over-communicate them. When I was an administrator, I shortened many conversations with kids. We had a discipline policy that basically boiled down to, was the action deliberate and malicious? That's sort of the overriding philosophy of it. We also had a respect for self environment, respect for self, respect for others, respect for environment. Student would come into my office, start giving a litany of what happened, why it wasn't their fault, etc. I would just say, were you respecting yourself, others, and the environment in that moment? Yes or no? We'd communicated that rules, we over-communicated it. If nothing else, it shortens conversations. And also, again, for a kid to be successful, for a kid to be resilient, they have to be successful. If they're going to be successful or learn how to be successful, if they're struggling, they have to be in a predictable program with a path to success. It's got to be predictable, so you've got to over-communicate the expectations. You have to be emotionally predictable for your learners. This is probably the biggest, for me, qualification to work, especially in independent schools with small classes. You have to be emotionally predictable. It's the closest thing to what I would call a deal breaker for someone who wants to work with children. Some people misunderstand what being emotionally predictable means. It doesn't mean always being calm and patient. When I look back at the teachers I had, every good teacher I had was patient, very patient. Every bad teacher I had was impatient. The best teachers I had were also impatient. They're just impatient in a different way, in a predictable way. And they were impatient with my shortcomings. They were impatient with my lack of effort. They were impatient with my behavior sometimes. And there's nothing automatically bad about impatience or frustration on your part. It's the predictability. That's the important thing. No child ever wants to work with an emotionally unpredictable adult. No adult ever wants to sit next to an emotionally unpredictable adult. I mean, this is probably the biggest thing. You've got your structure, you've got your program, your kids have a predictable path to success in front of them, they're placed in the right group. Now you have to be emotionally predictable for them. Positive reinforcement, using the sense of encouraging. I don't have a lot to say about this, except it has to be sincere on your part. Kids can tell when it's not. It also has to be appropriate, as our keynote speaker said. Some types of positive reinforcement work better than others. Don't tell the kid they're smart, tell them they worked hard. That sort of thing. It has to be the right positive reinforcement. And this is what, she actually said it better than me, I'm a little jealous right now. That's kind of what I was getting to here. If it's going to be sincere on your part, it has to be earned on the student's part. And smart isn't really something you earn. I get very frustrated with smart kids who won't work. I actually don't have a lot of patience for that. I try to base as much of my grading policy as I can on production. And I try to tell my students constantly, as part of my over-communicating my rules, is you will not ever, shouldn't say ever, I try not to speak in absolutes also. Kids hate that. They'll find an exception. They're wired for that. It's very rare to get paid for just what's in your head. It's very, very rare that anyone will care just about what's in your head. You have to produce something. I tell my students they get no credit whatsoever for doing homework. None, nothing, nip, zada, zip, nada. I tell my students they get credit for getting it to me in the manner I asked for it. If I want it uploaded digitally, they have to do that. If I want it handed to me on paper, they have to do that. Saying I did my homework but I don't have it, I don't even want to have that conversation. I'm big on shortening these conversations with kids. I tell them the first day, you get no credit for doing your homework, you must get it to me. So when they come in and said, I did it, but I lost it, I did it, but, okay, well, I've over-communicated that rule. There's a predictable outcome. I'm not going to yell at them about it. The natural consequence is what it is. Flip side of that, predictable path to success. I accept late work. My late work policy, by the way, is that I never quite understood why teachers took the same amount off every day. I get it, I respect it, it sends a message, it's predictable, it's fine. But if a kid is stressed out of their mind, they have some reason for not doing their homework on Tuesday, but it doesn't rise to the level of medical or emergency, the point where, I got an email from the administration saying this child needs to be excused. It doesn't rise to that level, but they're stressed. If they're stressed on a Tuesday, think about how their week is structured. School, after school activities. Wednesday's probably no better. Thursday's probably no better. Friday probably isn't. My late policy is the penalties kick in when it's late, and no further penalties kick in until the next Monday. If it's, give them a weekend to get their life together, especially when you're dealing with older kids. If you want to, Tuesday's just, if you're stressed on Tuesday, it's probably not getting fixed till Saturday. I know that's my experience.
It just keeps getting worse.
It's gonna probably keep getting worse. So, your work is late, there's an automatic penalty, it's predictable. No further penalty will be assessed till Monday. Because take the weekend, whether it's late on, if it's not done on Monday, if it's not done on Friday, take the weekend, get your life together, talk to me then.
Then you get a 0 hours.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
My 10-year-old, you're late, and
Incremental 10%.
10.
That seems discouraging.
Very.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so
Feel free to share this with them. Maybe it'll make a difference. Maybe not. Feeling of genuine accomplishment. Quick side note. If you are looking for cartoons or filler images to bolster your PowerPoint, you can currently find any thought ever recorded in human history with this baby's face behind it. I could have filled this PowerPoint with nothing but memes of this angry child. It's a great shot, I get it. I'm not sure why this one is so ubiquitous at the moment, but it is. Feeling of genuine accomplishment. They have to accomplish things they have to feel like they did. In math or gymnastics, it's fairly straightforward. I try to plan every lesson so that students have a new skill. That's the ideal. What does that look like? In AP Calculus, that might be something huge. In grade level Algebra 1, maybe with a slightly heavily supported group of kids, that might be something small, okay? You need to know why the kids are in front of you. They have to have that predictable path to success if they're gonna build that resilience. You gotta give them a taste for it. That's the biggest thing. Or plan lessons that allow students to accomplish an existing skill faster by an alternative method. You can't always teach them something new every day. They have to improve. That's an accomplishment. It usually is an accomplishment in their eyes. That part can be a little bit tricky sometimes because we can't define someone else's idea of personal accomplishment. Throw the word personal in there and it's grammatically impossible to define what personal accomplishment to someone else. They've got their own ideas on it. But there are some commonalities to what a kid will consider an accomplishment. And we do define success in our classroom, so that's part of the trick. You got to align your idea of success with their idea of accomplishment. That's rarely a short-term fix. I can never do that in a minute, This kid's idea of success is setting fire to my room. My idea of success is, at the very least, not having my room catch fire. It's kind of an extreme example, but I did work in a public middle school where that was a bit of a concern, actually. To feel as if they've accomplished something, the child must see what they're doing as important in that moment. And in math, I see this a lot. It's professional advice a lot. I'm very ambivalent about it. Real-world examples come up a lot. Launching rockets and actuarial tables are rarely important to a young child in that moment. They rarely are. It's a shame. I know one extreme example of that. I know a young man currently working as an actuary in Philadelphia. The actuary came to his classroom when he was in 9th grade and said, "This is what I do for a living." And this one, possibly only child ever in human history to say this, looked at an actuary and said, "That looks awesome, I want to do that." He majored in math, got his degree in math, and he is now an actuary and he's happy as a clam. And if my classrooms were filled with kids like that, well, honestly, I'd be bored out of my mind and I'd quit. But yeah, it's real-world examples rarely work. An accomplishment can be a lot of different things. Sometimes it's a new skill for its own sake. This should not be underestimated. Every kid I've met really likes doing a wide range of things regardless of practicality. Every person I've ever met likes doing it if they can feel successful at it. And what they get excited about will seem kind of strange to us. Sometimes it'll seem strange to total strangers. I came to acrobatics late in life. I went for martial arts in high school. I didn't really take my first gymnastics lesson until I was 17. Didn't join an acrobatics troupe till I was 20. I was 21 years old when I first did that. That was me at 36. It's on my Facebook page as a video, 36 years old. At 46 years old, I climbed a rope without my legs, probably for the last time in my life in a gym. That video is there under 46 years old. For 56 years old, I'm probably going to post me getting out of a lawn chair successfully. I didn't learn that until I was 21 years old. I didn't nail that until I was 20. I've worked for hours and hours and hours on it, far more than I should have spent. Should have been spending that time on my college academics, frankly. They suffered a bit. My mother, who was a brilliant woman in many ways, especially emotionally, my dad pressed me on that point a bit. She never did. She turned to my dad one day and said, that's the only reason he's still going to college, because he gets to do that in the afternoon. So, we're not going to make him pick, okay? Otherwise, I would have been a gym bum at 21 without a college degree instead of a gym bum at 24 with a college degree. So on my way home from the gym that day, I literally told 2 gas station attendants and a bank teller that I had just done my first round off back handspring backflip. They smiled politely. I think they just wanted me out of their places of business. At the time, this had no practical utility for me, but it was really powerful. I could do it. Not a lot of other people could do it. That was powerful for me. I had no idea I was going to be a full-time gymnastics coach, so ironically, I thought it was a useless skill in the moment. I was still excited about it. Turned out to be a very useful skill for my first full-time job out of college. An accomplishment for a kid. If a child suddenly sees themselves as strong in an area where they thought themselves weak, oh my God, that's an accomplishment. It could be juggling, it could be macrame, it can be math, it can be English, it can be something athletic. If they think themselves weak there and you see a chance to give them a moment of success, you're building resiliency. You're putting another brick in that wall. That's ridiculously powerful. What is that in your classroom for your child? I don't know. You're not all math teachers or gymnastics coach in front of me. So again, I apologize for, there may not be specifics enough here for some of you, but if you ask yourselves these questions, maybe you can come up with some. Come back, tell me about it, especially if it's in math. I always need new ideas. I might change this a little bit. An improved grade to gain approval from a parent, that can be a powerful thing. It can be a very powerful thing, an accomplishment for a child. Your approval. Don't underestimate your approval from that child. It may seem like they're trying to get negative attention from you constantly. So many times I've had students trying to get negative attention from me, and if I could give them a little bit of success in some way, work through that, be patient with that to a certain extent, appropriately patient, impatient with some of the behaviors, but also trying to reach through it, they'll start seeking positive attention. It's really amazing. This has almost never failed for me given enough time. It's not a quick thing. It's not a quick thing at all, but I wouldn't underestimate that one. I mentioned this before, that students often come to us with their own ideas of success. I'm trying to be resilient right now, actually. There's a bit of a fluff here. I rearranged these slides and I'm using an older version. But I'm going to be resilient in the face of this. Encouraging risk, I mentioned before. I just love this picture too much. You have to encourage kids to be risky. This is risky. It's dangerous, it's risky, but again, the student has control. So if you're going to encourage risk in a child, there are a couple of things you should keep in mind. Just in case these slides don't go in the order, I think I'm going to double check something right here. Because this is the current version. Okay, if you're going to encourage risk, everything else has to be in place. The structure, the expectations. You're emotionally predictable to the learner. You've given positive reinforcement appropriately when they've earned it. You have a good relationship with the kid based on trust and mutual respect. When a student is taking a risk, there's going to be fear. You're asking them to do something scary. And if you're an educator or coach particularly, what you have to constantly remind yourself is, it's probably not scary to you anymore. I haven't been frightened of the quadratic formula in a long time. I have to remind myself that 8th graders are. You've got to remember that that's the definition of risk. I see so many people talk about getting kids to take risks without just taking them to remind themselves, wait, They don't sound like they're asking the kid to do something scary. But it's in the definition. If it's going to be a risk, something frightening must be happening, or something anxiety-inducing must be happening. So if you're encouraging a kid to take a risk without remembering that, you're just encouraging them to be risky without thinking through the consequences. Does that make sense as an idea? Remind yourself, you want to take a risk? Respect the fact that they're afraid of it. If they're not afraid of it, you're not encouraging them to take a risk, by definition. You have to support your children as they take risks. This can be a funny idea. Supporting, and support does not mean rescue. If you're a gymnastics coach, you were regularly spotting kids. I was considered a particularly good hand spotter. Spotting has a very specific definition. It is to protect the head and spine at all costs. And that's as specific as it gets, literally, for legal reasons. Honestly, it is. The USA Gymnastics, 20 years ago, I don't know if this is current information, so please don't quote me on it. We'd go to these safety certifications, and they had to define spotting in a way that protected them from lawsuits. If a child is injured and you were spotting them, what does that mean? It had to have a legal definition. And it is protecting the head and spine. And that's it. So I'm going to spot this gymnast on a cheerleading clinic. Gymnastics classes are not normally held outside on the grass, but I'm going to spot her. Didn't actually wind up touching her. Okay, and I had to tell her that in advance. I'm going to spot you. My arms are underneath you. They're between you and the ground. And if you're, I will make sure nothing too horrible happens. I will protect them from harm. I won't protect them from hurt. I won't protect them from skinned knees, grass stains on their hands, ripped clothes if I have to grab their leotard as they're flying by. I have done that. That is terrifying. I definitely will not protect their dignity. Definitely not. They have to fall on their face sometime. A kid who doesn't fall on their face for long periods of time starts to scare me, actually, because the higher level they get without it, the worse it's going to be. It's going to happen on a harder, more dangerous trick. I showed the young woman swinging around the bar, handstand to another handstand. I've taught that to dozens of kids. I will not teach that skill until I've taught them how to screw it up. There is a correct way to screw it up. There are safe ways to mess it up. And the first thing I do is I teach them the safe ways to mess it up. And then once they know that, I'm standing there ready to protect the head and spine, and if I can, the ankle. There are other injuries you try. I'm not going to try to let them sprain an ankle or anything, but not going to protect their dignity. I'll protect them from harm, but not from hurt. That is my rule. I'm sympathetic when they're hurt. I don't mean to say it's callous. And this is part of the emotional predictability piece as well. When you, there's a different school of thought, and this video would look very similar. I could show this video another way. Some coaches, and early in my career, some tried to convince me this was a good thing, and I never liked it. They would have a child go for a trick, and the child was just scared. They could do it, was just scared. Sometimes they could do it with just a single finger spot, and the coach was like, you can do it. I have two problems. They would do this trick, which I hate. I have two problems with it, one physiological, one social emotional. They would say, okay, go for it, I'm spotting you. And then when the child goes for the trick, they would just step back. And the child would do it fine. I say, see, you could do it. Get over yourself. I have two problems with that. One, oh my God, when it goes bad horribly. I've seen kids spaz in midair, and there's a physiological component to this. There is several types of awareness. Haptic, optic, proprioceptive. Haptic awareness is where you are in space. If a child has weak haptic awareness, then that finger is telling them which way is down. It's orienting them. You are spotting. You're not carrying their weight with one finger. They don't have the really refined inner ear that some gymnasts do that tells them automatically by an internal gyroscope which way is down. So you were doing something, and some coaches didn't study their field and understand the underlying principles well enough to know that. The other thing you're doing is you're destroying your relationship with that child, and if that child advances with you to harder skills, good luck getting them to go for it. I wouldn't. Next time I'm really afraid. But so that coach does not understand the underlying principles. That coach is also ruining trust. But a video of that coach might look very similar to this. Because I looked like I was ready to catch the child, and then I did this. mostly because once I'm sure I'm not going to spot her, I don't want to get hit by an arm or a leg. The difference in this case is what I previewed and what I intended. I told the child, I am going to spot you, and here is what that means. The other coach said, I'm going to spot you, I'm going to let you assume it means catch you, and then I'm not. I rarely saw those coaches work with the same kids year after year, for good reason. What does that mean for you? Support, but not, does not mean rescue. I have a test correction policy in my classrooms. My test correction policy is you take a test, you're not happy with the grade. If the grade is 90 or higher, tough. If the grade is below 90, and I just apply this arbitrarily, don't have a cutoff, you may come back and sit with me. It must be with me, and we will go over the test. I will take the time out of my life to sit down with you, and we'll go over what you did wrong. And when I'm convinced you understand it, I will give you half the points back up to 90. You got an 80, you can go up to an 85. You get a 70, you can go to an 80. I've literally had one student get a 0 and bring it up to a 45. Normally kids shouldn't be getting zeros. This was a young man who made some poor choices of how to spend his time, and he came into a test, and he came up to me and he said, I don't want to disrespect you or waste anybody's time. I'm so not ready for this test. I just want to turn it in blank. And I said, well, we can apply my policy here. You can turn it in blank and meet with me, and you'll get a 45 on it. And he did. It took us like 5 lunch. It was a pre-calculus honors test. It took us like 5 classes to go over that test. It's insane. 5 lunch periods. But he knew what the predictable result was. I've also set up my grading policy in most of my classes, where if a child were to do that, I grade homework for effort. It has to be real effort. I define effort. I over-communicate my rules. Okay, they have to know what effort means to do that. I give them examples. Here are the first 4 steps of the problem, and I'm stuck on step 5. That is 100% effort for me. A blank piece of paper with WTF scrawled on it. No, that is not effort. You get nothing for that. Don't even hand that to me. If you get full credit for effort, I have a participation grade in my class. If you get full credit for participation, and I did the math on this. I didn't even realize I was doing this when I set up my grading policy. If you get zeros in all the tests and come back to me and sit with me and we bring all those zeros up to 45s, you'll still get a D in all of my non-AP classes. So there's a path to the bare minimum of academic success in my classes, even if you try that. And maybe that shouldn't be. I can have a reasonable argument with people on whether that should be the case. Maybe a kid who gets zeros should fail. Thank God I've never had a kid get multiple zeros in a row. Honestly, if that happened, I don't think I would let it get to the point of the D. I would go to the administration and say, hey, you know that why are the kids here slide? This kid is not in the wrong class. This kid needs to be at a birthday party and he's on a competitive team. I don't know, something like that. But there is a path. I'm supporting them. It's very, very hard to get an A in my classes. It's also very hard to fail my classes. There's a predictability there. I have given Fs. I fail kids. Kids make enough choices like that in a row, they will receive an F. And because I've got a structure that I can present to the administration on why they get an F, it's always been supported. I had a participation part. I actually was going to take this part out, but apparently I didn't. Participation I want to talk about as one thing. I don't know when Tyrannosaurus Rexes went from being the most frightening creature in the first Jurassic Park movie to being incessantly mocked on the internet for having tiny arms. But you can find a lot of these. I always liked in gymnastics clubs, when I worked with gymnastics, kids in gymnastics, one thing that really helped is the team spirit. Kids like to work for other kids. Kids like the attention of other kids. They'll take negative attention from their peers if they can get it, but if they can get positive attention, every kid I've ever seen who was in a moment where they looked like they got a chance to choose between negative or positive attention from me or from their peers wound up choosing positive. The kids who continued to choose negative, I really believe, just felt they had no other choice. I don't have a test for that, but that's an observation of mine I'll stand by. The gymnast is competing individually, but there's also a team trophy. I wondered how to bring that to my classroom a little bit, and Richard Lavoie, who's very well known in educational circles, I was watching, I think every educator has probably seen his Fat City Frustration, Anxiety, Attention video. I was watching that, and somehow that inspired me to come up with a definition of participation that would bring a little bit of that. And I define participation in my classroom as anything that helps the entire class understand the lesson better. Anything you do. And once I get to know that child, I can personalize that definition very carefully. Some kids, I literally define positive participation for them as being silent. My boss over there is running down the list in her head. She knows who's on that list.
Would you repeat that?
Anything that helps the entire class understand the lesson better is positive participation. Anything else isn't. It's very open-ended. I'm glad to work in independent schools where I can be this subjective. It's a team sport. They're graded individually, but if you can build that team thing, that is such a powerful motivator. The most powerful thing I ever heard of that, I worked in an experiential education program for a while, and I came up with something called acrophilia, love of heights as opposed to fear of heights. And I took students who I knew well on a program. We went rock climbing, we went hang gliding, we had a trapeze lesson, I gave them a gymnastics lesson, and we studied, preceding this, dopamine, adrenaline, exhilaration, fear, all that sort of stuff. And they presented to their parents afterwards, and a parent said, did your studies on the physiology and all that help you with your fear? This was a very personal experience for all these kids. Every kid had a different answer to every question asked of them. They didn't agree on anything and how they'd handle this, except for this question. The entire program of 10 kids all unanimously said no. Knowing what was going on intellectually was of no use whatsoever when I was actually strapped to a hang glider. None. And so the same parents said, well, what were your coping methods? And one girl nailed it. No one went after her. It was just perfect. She said, this is maybe the most profound thing I've ever heard. She said, I just gave in completely to panic and kept moving forward anyway because of peer pressure. I was like, wow. I mean, that's kind of, maybe I should have just told that story and said, guys, apply that to whatever you're doing. That's it. It's the best thing I can tell you. Participation is important. I define it for my kids carefully. That can help build resilience. If the more they're in it together, that can help. Help from a higher performing classmate can be really powerful to a struggling kid too. And I've taken kids aside and I've said, strict ethicists could have issues with this. I've taken kids aside and I've said, your participation grade now is helping that classmate. That gets complaints. But if I have a relationship with that kid, I can usually pull that off. Again, it's that team idea. If you can bring that to your classroom. In gymnastics, it's already there. That's just the ones that are hard to get the kids to buy into. See what else I said about this here. Over-communicate your rules, define everything. Do not take for granted that students blank. This is an old slide. Understand my expectations for participation is what that word is supposed to be. I'm going to go, right after this, I'm going to go make sure that the right slideshow is online, by the way. Do not take for granted that students understand my expectations for participation. Over-communicate your rules, over-communicate your expectations. Remind them. If they're frightened, they're a different kid than the last time you explained it to them. Context is a little off from participation, but in terms of over-communicating rules, I now tell kids what my emotional that's a little weirdly phrased, sorry. I now tell kids how my rules play out in terms of emotional predictability. I tell my classes in advance now. I didn't always do this, and I confused some children early in my career, and I feel bad about this. If you are coming to me for help with math, I am the most patient human being you will ever meet. You will nominate me for sainthood afterwards. You will not believe that I will run through 27 different ways to explain the problem, and then I'll start cycling back through them again if you still don't get it. But if I have to tell you 3 times to sit down and be quiet, you will not see that side of me. And there's no problem with that as long as it's predictable. As long as you've explained that to them. I had a few other experiences I wasn't proud of where, and I started doing this. So I'm going with kids on a field trip. I tell them, you know those jokes we make in class during lunch all the time? Yeah, don't do those in front of the museum tour guide. I tell kids, there is behavior. I have a pretty good relationship with a fair number of my students, I think, and it occurred to me that I was not being predictable if I don't remind them before every field trip that I'm going on. They've already usually figured out that what's funny during lunch isn't always funny during my class. So I tell them there's another stage to this now. What's funny during lunch and in my class is not funny when you're making me look like a bad supervisor in front of a stranger. But they need to hear this. Don't take that for granted. A lot of people expect that kids know what positive participation means. Most people don't even use my definition of it, so how could they know? I went over that already. Motivation. Motivation is a piece to this. And our keynote speaker already spoke about extrinsic versus intrinsic. And that's very important. But you must be an energy source for your learner. Your child, you have to be. You've got to be. That's just vital. I saw this most simply and beautifully put at a gymnastics conference where I was going to a specific conference on coaching vault. In vault, this is particularly important. Another quick visual aid here. It's called a Sukahara vault. It's very difficult. Sort of a gateway to harder tricks. Show that one more time just because. Put your hands on the vault, 1.5 flips off of it. It's also done at the end of an all-out 25-meter sprint. And every vault practice is repeated all-out 25-meter sprints, followed by something that requires incredible focus and concentration. I don't want to sound like a gymnastics snob and take away from other points, but at the end of most sprints, you get to flail your arms around and break a ribbon and collapse if you want. At the end of this sprint, you are in real trouble if you do any of that. You have to do a highly focused acrobatics move. You have to be an energy source for your kids. One of the most draining things I've ever done is given private lessons on kids on vault. You have to have alternate drills, you have to have other exercises. One child cannot sprint 25 meters, go over vault here, point your toes, go back and do it again for an hour. Got to be creative about it. You have to be an energy source. And if you're an educator or coach, it's hard some days, but you got to remind yourself, you love this stuff. At some point in the dim distance past, you decided this was something you wanted to get up in front of kids and shout about. And if you're in a different position with a child, you have to show them emotionally why they should care about what you're trying to motivate them on. You have to care about it yourself. That is by far my most effective extrinsic motivator. Yes, there's all these other things, but if that happens, if that extrinsic motivation happens in the space where you've got the structure, the expectations, the positive reinforcement when earned, and the feeling of genuine accomplishment, that can really nudge things along nicely. Okay, I mean, you gotta have that. You must be an energy source for the struggling child. It's hard. One new teacher acquaintance of mine once said, what do you do when you don't have that energy? And I said, if you fake it hard enough, they'll pick up on it, and you'll have more energy afterwards. You'll be surprised at that. And it really did work for her. You go in, you fake it, they just need to see the effort. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's one of those things I'm ambivalent about. Do or do not, there is no try. It's contextual. I used to have this poster on my wall in a 7th grade middle school classroom. I don't think I would put it up again. You guys heard that expression of Yoda, and sometimes coaches use it? It has to be used very carefully. That's one of those extrinsic things. And sometimes I feel this way. I will say this in certain select things, like the kid who, there are stages to trying. The kid who just writes WTF, I don't get this on their paper and tries to hand that in to me, no, they needed to do something else. That was not a try. But if they're past that stage, I wouldn't use this. But it's a common thing. Okay, you got everything else in place, you got your structure, you got your program. You need to give the positive reinforcement. It'll all be more meaningful if you have a good relationship with that learner. This, in many ways, to me, is the most important part. This is a very stupid cartoon. It is not there to make any point except that if you are looking for something for your PowerPoint and if you Google relationship meme or relationship cartoon, it is overwhelmingly inappropriate. So that's why this cartoon is up there right now, to spare you all that. But you have to have that relationship with a child. There is a new methodology that's come out. It is collaborative and proactive solutions. It's not super new, but they had a great quote. The New York Times was writing about it. Oh, I'm sorry, I get this from Mother Jones, not the New York Times. The collaborative and proactive system method hinges on training school or prison or psych clinic, a little scary that those are all lumped together, staff, to nurture strong relationships, especially with the most disruptive kids, and to give kids a central role in solving their own problems. I have a love-hate relationship with the idea of best practices. I love reading about new ideas. I love reading about tested ideas. I love that. Part of my problem with it is that best is a superlative. Okay, grammatically, it's like unique. There's no such thing as most unique or more unique. If it's best, it is simply the best. and so much is contextual. First of all, why are the kids there? Is the best practice for a birthday party the same as the best practice for a competitive team? Is the best practice for a honor student the best practice for a grade level student? Sometimes yes. I'm honestly not coming down one way or another on this. Sometimes it is. But I will tell you that my strong personal experience is that if by some objective agreed upon measure I am teaching by the best practice, and down the hall there's this teacher who by every objective measure is teaching with the 5th best practice, still good but 5th best, and my learner has a better relationship with my colleague down the hall, that's where they'll learn it. And that'll be fine. It'll be better. They'll want to keep going back to that person and learning more, actually. That doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for best practices. We should study them. We should learn them. Just, there's a context there. I wouldn't automatically, I mean, again, it's the grammar, best. It's got one meaning. I don't like that. This is not a new idea, the CPS. You've all probably heard it before. This gentleman has been pushing this idea in therapy, Dr. Irving Yalom, and there are therapists who push back on this, who believe there's a best practice, a best way to deal with the person in front of you. Dr. Yalom's been saying for, I think, over 50 years now, therapy should be theory-driven, not theory-driven, but relationship-driven. Doesn't mean you don't learn the theory, doesn't mean you don't learn everything else. But I'll tell you, if I have a relationship with a kid, I mean, I don't apply what I'm saying perfectly every day, believe me. Kids over there who will tell you, actually, but if I have a relationship with that child, I can mess up and they will keep coming back anyway. That's important too, several levels, one of which I'll talk about in a minute. Most extreme example of that, I taught a very small AP Calculus class at another school, and one day they needed to be yelled at. I needed to lose my temper appropriately, and I had stuff going on in my life, and I pulled that trigger, and I did not lose my temper appropriately. I mean, I didn't scream anything personal or transgressive to them, but it was just, I was way more angry than they needed. It wasn't a professional, controlled demonstration of my passion and concern for their well-being. The words were, but everything else was not. I felt bad about that. That afternoon, the 2 bravest kids in the class came to check in with me to see if I was okay. I'd messed up almost everything else I've said today in that moment, but I had this one going for me. So that's important, not just for them. Not just for them. Okay, I said this would be really light on specifics, because it is, again, resiliency is a side effect in my experience. It's not something to really aim for directly. You gotta kind of make it with a bank shot. But I do have one favorite strategy. You might call it a tactic more after this. It's one I'll share for you that has worked for me. It only works about half the time, but when it does, it is amazing. It's the most amazing strategy I've ever used, the most satisfying one. Step 1, admit you have a least favorite student. Just admit it. A lot of teachers don't want to admit it. They don't want to. Just admit it. You don't have to tell anybody. For God's sake, say nothing in this firm. But just admit it. You've got one. We all do. I got some kids over there now wondering, God, is it me? As much as you can, fairly and with integrity, plan your lesson around making that student successful. Don't do anything that'll screw up any other kids in the class. But I believe there's 10 or 15 different ways to teach anything. Pick the one that'll make that kid the most successful. Half the time I've done this, that student has no longer been my least favorite student. Half a dozen times they become one of my favorite students. And it never hurts to try. As long as if you know your underlying principles of your structure well enough, that you know that there's 15 different ways to teach this lesson. And that's hard sometimes. Some lessons I've been like, I don't know if I know a good way to teach this for that kid. But try. Sometimes they just pick up on the effort. Most extreme case, there was a student in one of my classes. I'm not giving any details about this one, sorry. You can guess whether it was in PG County, Montana, here, my other independent schools where I've worked. There was a student who came up in every faculty meeting where we discussed concerns about students. No teacher liked working with his kids. Smart, could handle the material. Not a good class participant, I'll just say it without going into more details. I tried this. I've never had it work better. And I was literally at meetings for the rest of the year where a college counselor once said, is there any teacher here who can write a positive letter of recommendation for this kid? And I said, yeah, sure, kid's great for me. Actually, that was the most extreme case I had. First, you got to admit you have one. My boss is right there trying to run through the list of kids I've taught. Wondering who this was. I'll tell you later, one-on-one.
I think I know who it is.
Final advice.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how that kid became successful in your class? Or what the problem was?
I'm pausing because I'm filtering out all of the specifics, actually. Now, I'm not saying that kid was a McLean student, but I'm filtering because I didn't want to say the grade level of the class or the specific. I'm not even going to say whether it was an academic or, well, I've already said it was academic. It's not an athletic situation. If I had to try to sum it up, this was a student who I think did not see the point to what they were doing. And I don't think it had much experience with people really going out of their way to see the relevance. And by relevance, I don't mean real world application. This was not someone who was going to say, that's what an actuary does. I want to do that. That was a really extreme case. What made it an accomplishment to them was being more successful. I think this student, if I'm speculating wildly out of my area of expertise here, but this was a student who I believe thought themselves to be good, but that wasn't good enough next to others who were better. And getting a real competitive chance to be better in this one class of mine seemed to make a difference. Unfortunately, only in my class. Apparently, things didn't necessarily improve much elsewhere. But that's my key, and I can talk to you one-on-one later if you want, but to say anything more would be like, I might give away something I don't want to. But yeah, that's what I think was going on. Interesting what I just did there, by the way. I didn't really understand the underlying structure of what was going on, but that strategy still helped me to fix it. You know, so I mean, I'm just saying I don't really know what was going on deep down. I'm not qualified to clinically analyze this child, but that strategy of mine did come through in that case. It's not a quick fix. Good time. If this goes perfectly, it's like a 2-week process with a 50-50 chance of helping. That's the shortest fix I can give you on really trying to build resilience in a struggling learner. So if you want to hear that thing, what can you do in 5 minutes with this kid? I'd love to be proven wrong on this. My professional opinion is that's like Bernie Madoff offering you 20% interest. If they're talking about genuine anxiety, not fear. I got lots of quick tricks for fear. Most of them involve back handsprings that are probably of limited utility to you. But, but if it's real anxiety, I would be very wary of anyone who says, I'll tell you how to fix that in 5 minutes. I like this final advice cartoon for a couple of reasons. How likely a person is to give you unsolicited advice about something and how completely he's failed at it. The ironic thing about me choosing this cartoon is what are we talking about today? Kids who are on the verge of failing or failing. I've failed at a lot of things, actually. That's partly why I can talk about resilience. In the short term, I failed at a lot of things. I haven't failed a lot of things in the long term yet. But there's an element of this. Be honest. Doesn't mean full disclosure. And I don't just mean being like that, I don't just mean being like the coach who says they're going to support and then doesn't. Be really honest with your kids. Never tell a kid it'll be easy if it won't. And this doesn't mean share. The correct, honest answer to kids a lot of times is, I can't tell you that about it. But be really honest with them. They'll pick up on that. Kids have come to me in the past when there's been controversy or stress in a school, when I had no administrative function, no seniority, nothing, and they've said, can you tell me anything about what's going on? And 9 times out of 10 I've said no. 1 time out of 10 there is something I can share professionally and ethically, and I do. 1 time I finally said, just out of curiosity, why did you come ask me? I didn't even teach this kid, I wasn't their advisor or anything. And said, I just know you won't bullshit it. It's part of the, build an honest relationship with the kid. Doesn't mean full disclosure, doesn't mean overshare, doesn't mean come in and tell them about the argument with your spouse last night, but be honest with them. Be consistent, especially emotionally. That's huge. I cannot stress that enough. If they're going to learn that there is a way to be successful and keep trying, they have to go through a predictable, consistent program. You have to teach them a path to that. All right? If they see that 10, 15 times in a row, they'll start to believe that there is a path to success for almost anything. They really will. But you've got to be consistent. You've got to model that. Don't be afraid to apologize to a student or even to a class. I've done that before. It's not fun. It's not hard. I'd take that back. It's not fun. It is hard. But don't be afraid to apologize to a student or even to a class. Oh my God, I had a headbutting contest with a kid a few years ago, and the next day I said, you know, what you were doing was not right, but seriously, my reaction was terrible. I apologize for that. I don't apologize for calling you out on it, on what you were doing, but I really apologize for how I handled it. And that was fine. Do not be afraid to admit ignorance. Nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. That's great, actually. Ideally, it's followed up with, but I'm going to check and get back to you. Because what do you want them to do when they don't know something? You want them to check. You want them to find it out. You have to model that. You got to model a fair amount of resilience yourself. That's been the subtext of kind of what I've been saying this whole time. Everything I've said depends on you being a resilient learner for that child in front of you. Not necessarily of your own material, but of them. You got to keep trying to figure them out. They're not going to keep trying to figure out the problem in front of you if you're not putting a similar effort into figuring them out. Every kid's a maze. Every kid is. I love math. I'm not interested enough in math to talk about math year after year if I don't have something else to figure out. And it's that kid, and the teachers, particularly here at McLean, that last here a long time and stay here, are the kids who are fascinated each year with each new maze in front of them. Each new kid. What's this kid's hook? Take certain things personally and only those things. If a kid insults my hairdo that day, which hasn't happened for years, I don't take that personally. If a kid fails when I could have done better, I do take that personally. I take my part of it personally. I have an extreme story about this, actually. I was an administrator at a school, and I had to talk to the entire student body about some behavior patterns. And I got up in front of them and I said, this is my upper school, and you will not do that in my upper school. This is my upper school. I am taking this very personally. You cannot do this behavior and not affect me personally. You don't get to say, oh, I didn't mean to offend you. No, you are offending me. I am taking it personally. And literally half an hour later, I was in my office when I got a phone call from a lawyer of a non-custodial parent demanding school records and that the school be dragged into the custody battle, essentially. And I didn't think about the irony in the moment, but I literally said, okay, well, I just work here. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation with exactly 2 directors and managers, a CEO and a CFO, and I will give you both of their numbers right now. This is my upper school. Apparently, unless you're a lawyer. It's a little weirder in the classroom, but I mean, I take certain things very personally for my kids, and other things I don't. What things? I don't know. Why is that child in front of me? If a child is not paying attention on their birthday party, I don't take that very personally. When I was a gymnastics coach, a gym bum, if they are not paying attention when I'm about to, that vault you saw, the Sukahara vault, I had a kid not pay attention when I was explaining what to do, forgot what I said, flaked, came over the vault, going in a strange direction. I had to do a midair flying tackle and make sure that I landed on the ground before she did, protecting her head and spine. I took that personally, that she did not pay attention, because I had bruises from it. Pick what you're going to take personally, pick your battles, and then take them very personally. Rest of it, let go. That's my advice for not burning out in this field also. Incidental learning never ends. This is vital if you're going to be in front of anyone. Sorry for this time, I apologize for running all over. Incidental learning is the child psychology idea that babies pick up on everything you're doing. Language, a lot of kids learn to speak without any direct instruction in how to speak. They're picking it up incidentally from what you're doing. First heard about this idea and I tried to find out, well, when does it stop? When do babies switch from incidental to direct learning? As near as I can tell, it's never. You are all incidentally learning from me right now. I'm incidentally learning from you, from me. If you want resilient kids, you have to be resilient. They will pick up on whether you are or not. Incidental learning never ends. I'm sending all sorts of signals to you guys. I don't want to know what half of them are, but I'm getting them back from you. You have to be aware of this at all times. And if you want resilient learners in your life, they'll know whether you are or not, no matter how well you try to hide it. I'm supposed to say any questions at this time, but apparently I babbled on for too long. Come talk to me if you want. I'll be right here. Thank you.